Hello, hello, and welcome. Welcome once again to the Secrets of the High Demand Coach. And I'm here with yet another high demand coach, and that is the one and only Jerry Fu. Prior to starting his coaching business, Jerry served as a pharmacist and began facilitating leadership workshops in 2012. Jerry is a conflict resolution coach who helps Asian American leaders to advance in their career and life journey. Now, Jerry started coaching in 2017 to help Asian American professionals deal with the conflict that they encounter at work, with their culture, and within themselves. He's coached leaders at companies like Capital One, Boehringer-Ingelheim, and Microsoft. Ever heard of them, right? And he's an associate certified coach through the International Coaching Federation and certified in talent optimization, EQI 2.0 and EQI 360. The question that jumps off the page at me here, Jerry, is what haven't you done? I mean, you've pretty much done everything. So first off, I'm so excited to have you here on the show. I can't wait to dive into some of the stuff you're doing around conflict resolution. I think it's really powerful, really special. Before we do that, though, I want to hit rewind for just a moment and talk about it. So you were a pharmacist, is that right? Tell us a little bit about that, some of the things that you learned there and how that ultimately led you to making the leap into doing coaching.
Yeah. Pharmacy was the healthcare default setting that my family wanted me to do, but not quite because my family has a line of doctors. And so when I was not in line to become a physician because I didn't quite have the drive to get the grades to push my way in, I said, well, I still want to do healthcare. So what's the next best thing? And pharmacy was on the up and up. And so thanks to pharmacy for providing some level of prestige and salary comparable to what healthcare practitioners are supposed to make. And at the same time, after about 5 years working for a chain pharmacy to obtain the stability my immigrant father never had, I decided I needed something different. And so tried to leverage my network and got a teaching job through a pharmacy consulting company that I left my home for because at the time I was living with my family. And I thought that would be the last company I ever needed to work for.
Right.
And 11 months later, I got fired.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so that was the wake up call that made me realize, hey, you know what? Something isn't working. I didn't want to admit the difficult and essential truth that I needed to really grow up at that
Yeah.
point. That it wouldn't be
Well,
enough to just work for a nice company and assume that they would never be so mad at me that they would cut my position. So the next reality check happened 6 weeks later when I stumbled into a House of Cards pharmacy job where four of my paychecks bounced, filling for crooked doctors. So not only am I jeopardizing my license, my owner isn't even paying me for it. So how do you confront a guy who's clearly ripping you off? Like they don't tell you these things, right? You
no.
didn't think you'd ever have to like find a tool in your toolbox in order to do these. And so after 9 months of chasing down paychecks and praying that I didn't get in trouble with the state board, my network came to rescue me again and got me on with another company that was more legitimate but couldn't pay me more than 8 hours a week. And so I said, well, beggars can't be choosers. What can I do next? And so they said, well, you can get more hours in Austin, which is not a bad city to land in, but still wasn't home. And so that summer was key because some friends of mine who run a pharmacy leadership nonprofit said, hey, we know you've been facilitating workshops on the fraternity side, but we'd love for you to step into our leadership meeting because one of our facilitators backed out. And so I said, yeah, absolutely. And so teaching leadership did something like it changed my thinking about whether or not I could actually become a good leader. Because before I just said, oh, it's not possible. Like I'm not good at it. The few
Yeah.
times I've tried, I failed. I must never be good at it. But now I said, well, what if I could be a good leader? If I put in enough work, what could happen? And so when a manager position opened up in Houston, where I'd been based out of when I took the consulting job, I said, okay, gotta take on this challenge. Can't stay safe. Want to sleep in my own bed again. And so I said, wow, this will be it. It wasn't. And so um, about a year later, while I was on probation for not writing up or firing technicians who were not pulling their weight, the company had their funding pulled. And the only reason they got an interview with my next company was that I had leadership experience on my resume. So what I tell people is that leadership saved my career. And
Well,
so while I had more doors open for me now that I have more credibility on my career path, I got tired of the grind because every job business model just wasn't sustainable compared to big chains or things like that. And I knew I didn't want to work for them. So I said, well, what's left? And I said, I love people development because I consistently been facilitating workshops since I started 11 years ago. And I said, what if I made a career out of that? Still very scared of failure and rejection. And so nothing serious happened until 2020 when I decided to get some coach training through ICF. And then the pandemic hit. And then we said, well, now what? And grateful for the pharmacy job I have and still have, actually. That helps pay my bills. But I said, how much longer am I going to put the dream off? And so October of 2020, filed the LLC, got it going, try, struggle, fail, lots of anxiety, but revenue is on its way up, and grateful that I had the chance to step into this opportunity.
That's fantastic. What a story. What a story. There's a lot to unpack there. I'd like to start, though, with this. What would you say today is some of the most important work you're doing with your coaching clients?
Yeah, I'd say I'll give an example. So one leader said, hey, I inherited my team. It's been 3 weeks, and I have someone who's been on this team for about 10 years. So he's very seasoned, he's very experienced, but he's also mad that he has not gotten the promotion. But the last 2 supervisors who tried to give feedback on what he was lacking in order to actually be qualified to consider a management position, he rebuffed. And so he asked me, how do I get this guy to take my feedback seriously? Like, how do I make sure I don't have the same fate he does? Right. And so by now I have a framework to help people who are conflict averse like me, who still don't like writing people up, firing people. I hope I never get to a point where I take satisfaction in doing these things. But, we said, okay, well, how do you want this conversation to go? Right? What's possible? What's success to you? Is it just being able to say what you need to say? And even if he disagrees, is it finding some level of compromise? Is it him opening up a little more to consider? Would he be willing to change? Or is it just, hey, I just want to put it out there. If he says no, then hey, well, one less thing to worry about. Right. So we had him imagine what a successful conversation would sound like, right? And then second step would be to say, okay, when are you going to find 10 seconds of courage to actually initiate this conversation, right? 10 seconds of courage people love because you don't have to be a superhero. Just be one for 10 seconds. Pick up the phone, send that email, send that text, roll that boulder, lock the gate behind you. Okay, nope, we're dumping you in the pool. You better start swimming, right? And so, just get in the game, right? Yeah. And then step 3, hey, script your critical phrases, right? Think about what you're going to say, what kind of case you want to make on paper. Don't let it rattle around in your head, and anticipate the pushback you're probably going to get, right? And so when you anticipate pushback, how will you counter the counter? And so now we have kind of an idea of, hey, let's inventory this. Let's make sure we don't get tangled in the weeds of every possible scenario, but let's look at the, 1 or 2 most likely and then see what happens. So then step 4 is to rehearse these moves, right? You didn't just do this homework just to turn it in and get an A. You need to practice your posture, your tone, your body language. Can you role play with a friend to iron out your phrasing so you don't trip over your own words in the heat of the moment, right? And then step 5, hey, follow through, right? No plan survives attack by the enemy or by reality, but can you improvise? Can you think on your feet in such a way that will still get you across the finish line? And even if you don't, now you have feedback you can study to say, hey, if I had to do this over, how would I tweak my approach? And then how can I keep dialing and adjusting until I actually get where I need to go? So those are the things that I do for my clients.
Yeah, I love that. I love the 5 steps too. So how does, someone who is, by your own kind of admission here, conflict averse, how do you end up landing in this world of conflict management?
Yeah. Sometimes you don't choose your specialty. Sometimes it chooses you, right? Sometimes the moment of greatest pain and struggle is the exact moment of turning around and helping people with the same struggle. You realize, hey, I didn't want this. I remember there was a guy I know who started the prison ministry who was a former felon, and he thought he'd never want to go back to jail again. But guess what? Where's his greatest impact? Right back where he had struggled for so long. And so, don't get me wrong, guys. It's not like, oh, what's broken now, right? It's like, hey, guys, I've been through the mud. I've been through the struggle, and if you're willing to put in the work, maybe you can get there too. So that's why I realized that was the one rate limiting step that helped me back every step of the way. Whether it's like, hey, how do I have a difficult boss or a difficult conversation when my boss and I don't see eye to eye? How do I confront the guy who's causing me problems? How do I confront people who are not pulling their weight? Everything comes down to being able to, hey, get started, get in there, deal with that struggle, deal with that anxiety, and realize it's not fatal.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a fascinating statement because somewhere inside of our brain, right, and different people will debate it a little bit, but somewhere inside of our brain, the reptilian brain, we'll call it that for now, for lack of a better term, but it's literally screaming, "You're gonna die," right?
Yeah.
Like if you have that conversation, you are going to die, right?
Yeah.
And so it's hard for us to even relate to that concept. Because I mean, we know that, okay, if I walk in, it's not going to be the end of me, right? I'm not physically going to die, but I feel so strongly about this. And I love your point. I think it was step 2, but your 10 seconds of courage, right? So just, I want to pause on that thought for a little bit and just kind of unpack it a little bit. Why 10 seconds of courage?
It's right outside your comfort zone, right? Just to say, hey, can you shrink that change? Because some people, right, they think, oh, I have to put on the whole superhero costume before I can go into the building. And,
Mm,
I don't want to put on the cape right now. I don't want to put on the boots right now. And then, meanwhile, there's a raging fire. And you say, well, the fire will go out eventually. And it's like, well, that's true. But now everything is burnt down. Like there's nothing to save.
right.
And so when you say 10 seconds, you say, oh, like, I don't know how to find courage. It's like, well, can you drum up 10 seconds? Like, surely you can find 10 seconds. So just stretch yourself in that moment. Oh, 1,000, 1,000. All right, send the email. Boop, done. Okay. Oh, right. And then deal with the immediate remorse afterward. You're like, I can't take it back. And you're like, oh, well, may as well grow
Yep.
up now, right? It's like,
Yep.
better step up.
It's such a good point because, anything, I mean, conflict avoidance is a big one for a lot of folks,
Mm,
but anything, there's that, that procrastination, right? I think that principle can be applied just across the board. There's something that everyone doesn't want to do, right? Or
mm-hmm,
everyone doesn't want to do something is probably a better way of putting that. And I think that idea of, and I loved how you positioned it as like, hey, imagine this going well. Like, what do you
mm-hmm,
actually want out of it? And then from that place, we have a vision of something we're walking to. All right, find that 10 seconds of courage to just start the ball rolling. There's a lot of wisdom in that. I love it. Now, next question here. I want to actually rewind to the story you told on when you first came in,
yeah.
and you were talking about the stability my immigrant father never had, and
Mm-hmm.
there was just some weight on that. So, um, I'd love to hear a little bit of how that has continued to shape some of the decisions and how you've used that to help the leaders that you serve.
Yeah, yeah. Um, my parents' definition of success is a steady paycheck and benefits, and I can appreciate those really when you want to have a good, profitable, credible job skill, whether it's medicine or engineering or otherwise, and to be able to have someone say, "Yes, I value your skill." Right. The problem is that the everything comes externally, right? It's just I don't have it in me, and therefore I'm relying on this external source to give me validation or
Mm,
some sense of stability, right? And then you realize that doesn't always happen. And even if I didn't get fired, I've worked for companies that it didn't matter, that it wasn't my fault. Like the company still folded. And so you realize, I remember one coach saying, peace of mind is knowing that you can make money when you need to make it, right? Like the
mm,
ability to produce wealth. And you realize, hey, you know what? I'm going to have to trust in my own creative resourcefulness to, make money somehow, whether it is, hey, I go tutoring or I, like do a presentation or I solve some other problems. And so you realize stability is much more fleeting than you realize. But then when you internalize it and say, hey, you know what? I can do something about this. Like, where's my locus of control? And so don't get me wrong. Like I'm more like my dad than I want to admit, where I want certain things. And then you realize, okay, well, that's good. I can appreciate the intent behind what he wanted for me and what he wanted for himself. And at the same time, how do I put my own spin on it so that, yeah, because otherwise no one would work for themselves, right?
yeah.
And no one would want to bet on themselves and say, you know what, no, I'm going to buy my own benefits. They're expensive, but hey,
Right.
I'm not going to be slave to somebody else and dependent on someone else's paycheck.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, that's powerful. One of the things that I noticed even in your bio that you sent over in the website and everything is you do a lot of work with other Asian Americans.
Mhm.
And what would you say are some of the unique challenges that Asian Americans face in the U.S. workforce today?
Yeah. There's a number, right? One is the culture that I grew up in doesn't necessarily match the culture of the company I'm working for. That's the
Mm,
first thing. The second is this uphill battle where you have to work twice as hard sometimes for the same amount of credit, assuming you even get it, right? There is this continual, am I enough? And sometimes that drive can lead to some good things, but you realize that you will never be content if you let that happen. So if I had to list the challenges, one is adjustment. How do I adapt without compromising who I am? The second would be engagement, right? To say, okay, what are the rules? Which ones should I follow? Which ones can I stretch or even break? And, am I willing to break? And am I willing to accept the consequences if I do? And then three, what is the target, right? Am I looking for just another step up the ladder, or am I really looking to live for something bigger, like quality of life and meaningful relationships and things? And so I'd say those are three of the biggest ones that
yeah,
any Asian American leader would have to encounter.
yeah, yeah. And along those same lines, how do Asian Americans do you find, and we're painting really broad strokes,
Of course.
but just in general, right? Even if we go with the stereotype of it, which again has a negative connotation, but you get where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
What's kind of a standard approach for Asian Americans, and how does that differ from the standard approach to conflict for the general U.S. workforce?
Yeah. Asians tend to be very deferential, right? Which is not a problem when it comes to respecting a title, but it gets off the rails, right? When you think about like the Korean Airlines example, where people were afraid to speak up to the captain when like the plane was clearly in trouble. And then when you realize that your social protocol is greater than like patient, like, or, passenger safety, then it's like,
Right.
okay, that goes off the rails.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'd say like when you speak, it's like, hey, it's okay. Like speak up to know, hey, here, boss, I need to bring something up with you, and here's why, right? And when you emphasize the benefit of why you're bringing things up, it kind of takes away the sting a little bit of recognizing, hey, you know what? Hey, it's going to be hard, and this isn't a comfortable topic. And I know that if we work through it, that our relationship will be stronger. So
Yeah.
I'd say the turning point is recognizing, hey, like the conflict doesn't mean something's wrong. The conflict means something is right because the fact that you're able to bring this up without fear of retribution or retaliation means that the relationship is strong.
Yeah, yeah, that's such a powerful phrase. What can we do as leaders here in the U.S. to get the most out of again Asian Americans who have a similar story to yours?
Yeah. I'm reminded of a book called Humble Inquiry by Edgar Schein, and I think the posture you take to establish a sense of belonging when you say, "Hey, I know some things. I don't know everything. I'd like to learn more about you. What, you know, going beyond what I assume about you, going beyond what I know about your culture. That may, that information may be wrong, or I may be misinformed. And how do I bring out the best in you? Like, how can I serve and support you?" And when both sides take that humility stance, I think there's a lot there that makes me say, hey, you know what? I want to put my faith in this person, right? They're letting me open up. They're
Yeah,
letting me be myself. And when you have that sense of belonging and and you can do away with the pretenses, I think it helps get people in the right frame of mind for
yeah.
even before you appreciate any of the work that they do for you.
Wow, wow. Yeah, it's such a good point. It's often, humility and conflict, right? It's just
Mhm.
those two things feel like they can be tricky to navigate, but I think you're right. Setting that as, hey, this is the foundation, both from as leaders and as employees and team members. If we can approach each of those situations, not with a humility that causes us to back down, right, and avoid conflict, but a humility that says, hey, I want to understand this better, right? Humility that leads to curiosity, I found, is one of the key pieces to approaching conflict. And I think you really hit that well. All right, here's a question I like to ask all my guests,
Of course.
and it's this: what is the biggest secret that you just wish wasn't a secret at all? What's that one thing that you wish everyone listening or watching today knew?
Yeah, yeah. It kind of ties back to recognizing that failure is not fatal with conflict. It comes back down to recognizing, hey, guess what? Conflict resolution is a skill anybody can learn. Like it's not just reserved for like the experts or like certain people have it or they don't. Maybe some people are more willing to engage, but that doesn't change the fact that they still have to work and refine how
Mhm.
they engage conflict. And so
Yeah.
when you say, "Hey, put in the work," and even if you say, "Oh, I'll never be a conflict resolution expert," it's okay as long as you're better than when you started. We'll all celebrate that.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And this idea of it being a skill, because a couple of times throughout the conversation, you've had these moments where you're like, I couldn't do that. You stepped out, you had your own 10 seconds of courage and went in and did it. And so that person who's sitting there and they just heard it, right? Conflict resolution is a skill that anyone can learn, but they're still like, I don't know. What would you say to them in this moment?
Yeah, yeah. I kind of pull the same mental kind of, yeah, I don't want to call it a trick, but it's something like his mental switch, right? To say, well, if you could do it, like how would you carry yourself, right?
Yeah.
If you were a good leader, could you put on your imagination hat for just a second? Let's say, we just switch that on. And, if you were an expert in this subject, how would you know, say or do things? And all of a sudden, right, when they realize the pressure's off because the body doesn't realize you're like hypothetically experimenting, and then all of a sudden, like you take the rails off, and then all of a sudden they just start to kind of play with their own tools and
Yeah.
come up with their own stuff, and it's just fun to watch.
That's fantastic. Oh, that's fantastic. All right. So I'm going to have you take off your coach hat for a second. I'm going to have you
Okay.
put on your CEO, your leader hat of your own, and tell us, what does the next stage of growth look like for you as a leader, and what challenges do you think you're going to have to overcome to get there?
Yeah, yeah. I've been dealing with this for the last 2 or 3 months actually, and I've come to the sobering realization that I'm relying on a lot of coaching platforms for revenue, and grateful for them, grateful that they trust me to represent their platform as well. And I've realized that um, I can't make a career pivot based on the compensation that they're giving me. Thankful for it, and I know that overall, as numbers, right, it'll just only be a hobby at best if I just continue to just say, "Hey, this is enough." Same thing with uh, podcast appearances, right? It's just an easy target now. Like I got over that fear of rejection, and grateful again for every host I've met. And but at the same time, I realized, you know what, I need to do more keynotes. I need to do um, more of my own products, because
Right.
that way I don't have to settle for the scraps when it comes to
Yeah.
selling and the revenue. So yeah, that's my big hairy audacious goal this year, is just that, hey, you know what, I'm going to have to start chasing after whales and not just settle for the minnows.
That's great. Well, it's there's that moment of like and then
Yeah.
you go in and yeah, again, you'll find your 10 seconds, and what you're doing is remarkable. It's special. It's needed. And so I'm so excited just thinking about the success that you'll be able to achieve as you go out there and make it happen. We've seen it in your story time and time again, and I appreciate you sharing that with me and with our audience. So there's some folks that are out there listening, and they're just there's so much about your story that they resonate with, right? And they want to be able to step into conflict. They're dealing with something at work right now, and they're dealing with it by not dealing with it, or whatever it may be, right? They just want to become better leaders. They want to become better at this skill of conflict resolution. How can they find out more about your work and what you do?
Yeah, yeah. There's a free guide giveaway outlining these 5 steps with the case study. www.adaptingleaders.com/guide. Or if you just go to adaptingleaders.com, check out the website. There's a free blog where I unpack all sorts of neat material or book summaries, or schedule a complimentary 30-minute call. Experience coaching for yourself and realize just what kind of transformation it leads to. But at the very least, adaptingleaders.com.
That's brilliant. Excellent. Adaptingleaders.com/guide. Jerry, it's just an honor having you on the show. So appreciate you being here. And for those of you who are listening, watching, you know that your time and attention mean the world to me. I hope you got as much out of this conversation as I know I did, and I cannot wait to see you next time. Take care.